it wasn't sticky enough. In 1968, American chemist Spencer Silver was trying to develop a new adhesive for his company, an adhesive that was tougher, stronger, inviolable, permanent, all the things implied by the very word adhesive. So when he invented microspheres, a purposely weak adhesive that is easily removed from the surface, well, no one seemed to know what to do with it. An adhesive that didn't actually stick to things was an oddity, an irony, a curiosity, a parlor trick, but ultimately, as an adhesive, it was a failure. The invention was shelved on scientific equivalent of the island of misfit toys. The search for surer glues continued. Fast forward a few years later, when fellow employee Art Fry attended his usual Sunday morning church service. As a member of the choir, he had carefully marked the day's hymns with bookmarks at the Thursday night's rehearsal, only to find that by Sunday morning the bookmarks had all fallen out. Wouldn't it be great, he thought, if I could have a bookmark that would stick to the page, but be removable so it didn't mark or destroy the pages? Well, when Art Fry and inventor Spencer Silver finally made a connection, the Post-it note was born. Even then, its full potential was not understood, and the Post-it notes were confined to internal use and application. But over time, people started using the little papers as notes, as memos to one another, as reminders to themselves. Mr. Fry says, I thought what we have invented here is not just a bookmark, it's a whole new way to communicate. It took 12 years from its invention to finding an actual purpose and market for it, but today 50 billion Post-it notes are produced each year. It has become an office staple. No pun intended. But what an ironic way to connect things with a weak adhesive. Who knew there was a need for a non-sticky adhesive? Its perceived weakness literally became an innovative strength. All this has been on my mind lately because our congregational theme this month is connection. We are experimenting with focusing on a monthly theme. Each one is inspired by Karen Armstrong's book, 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life. You can read more about this in the newsletter, on the downstairs bulletin boards, and there are some questions about connections you can choose to engage with on the tables downstairs. So as I began to reflect on the underlying purpose and practices of connection, I wondered, are Unitarian Universalists the Post-it note of the religious world? I mean, there are some similarities. First, we are a small but mighty group, just 50 congregations in Canada, about 1,000 in the United States. But at crucial moments in history, we've had a lot of political clout in social justice. Most recently, in our generation, Unitarian Universalists have played a critical role in establishing same-sex marriage in Canada and securing reproductive choice. We are currently part of the choice in dining movement. Second, our denominational size is related to another mixed blessing of removable, adjustable adhesion. Our congregations tend toward a pretty fuzzy idea of membership, which is meant at aiming at inclusion and flexibility. So many committed Unitarian Universalists say, we're just not joiners. So the number of voting members usually does not actually reflect the size of most of our congregations, making us seem smaller than we already are. In fact, the Hamilton Unitarian Church actually recognizes a category called adherents. That is long-time committed friends to a congregation who donate money, they pledge, they volunteer, they show up, they do everything a member does except vote. So as a result, we can end up sending mixed messages about membership. Let me be clear, I do care whether you join us or not as a formal member. But not choosing to join does not prevent you from participation in most of church life. So there's no conversion process, it's a choice. So, join, but not if you want, you don't want to. Third, there's no definition that really sticks for us. Unitarian Universalism has no creed. That is, we are not defined by a set of beliefs. I understand that for most church-going people, hey, so you're going to a Unitarian church. What do Unitarians believe? It's a perfectly natural question. It's just not one that defines us. Compound and confound that by explaining that we bridge even the great imagined divide between theist and atheist, and everywhere in between and beyond. Only about half of Unitarian Universalists in North America have some kind of belief in God, and usually that is a very, very big, broad definition of the G word. That means, by the way, that fully half do not believe in God. So try explaining to most people why atheists, like your minister, come to church, and, well, that will be the topic of next week's Sunday service. When asked what do you use, believe, we can't even claim to answer that multiple choice question with D, all of the above, or E, none of the above. In the test of faith, most are not content with the answer, some of the above. Not so helpful. So we do not adhere to any set of beliefs, and add to that, our own individual beliefs are ever evolving. What I choose to believe today may not describe me or define me tomorrow. Our membership and friends identify as pagan and Protestant, mystic and mythbuster, agnostic and atheist, Buddhist and Jew, the Christian and the curious. The useful adhesive, then, that binds us together is a covenant, a promise to walk together in our journeys, knowing and celebrating that we do not always agree. Consider that the root of the word religion is religio, meaning to bind, to connect. And for Unitarians, that connection is a bond of choice, not necessity. It is connected not through the threat of hell or thoughts of heaven, but solely by a commitment to circles of care and compassion for one another, for our communities, for the interdependent web of life on this planet, our only home. How then are we bound? Is this expectation too weak an adhesive to weld commitment to the care of the world? Fundamentalist religions are on the rise with their steadfast do-or-die, kill or be killed beliefs hammered like nails fixed on the soul, on the spirit. Meanwhile, liberal faiths like ours don't destroy what we touch. And our ambiguity and precious treasury of doubt, though, is not really all that compelling to a wide group of people. One wonders if more certainty, more theological glue would do us good to make our Unitarian Universalist message stick. It's tempting sometimes. How tempting to have the familiar orange-capped white bottle of glue or plaster of Paris, flour paste, a handy less mess glue stick, an electric melting craft glue gun, or maybe more permanent, like cement glue in a tiny tube or rubber cement with that sicky sweet smell. Nothing wrong with a little Scotch tape, unless you're posting something on our walls, and we prefer that you use ticky-tack adhesive that also comes off the wall without peeling the paint. A tab leaves marks where something was, but a nail could fix things in place. A nail feels more permanent. We Unitarian Universalists who pride ourselves on our flexibility of faith, of our treasured reverence of doubt, of theological diversity, we are sometimes so committed to the ideals of individual freedoms that we forget to let people know we exist. Our reluctance to speak out, to broadcast a bigger, louder message for fear of proselytizing is well meant, but sometimes self-defeating. We too have good news to share. We can forget that it matters that we are Unitarian Universalists. I've wondered about the shadow side of our weak adhesive. We're sometimes so eager to celebrate that we are seekers that we neglect to notice that maybe, just maybe, we have found something here, right here, in our congregation. In our mistaken insistence that anything goes, we sometimes neglect to notice where we are going and to what purpose. Another way we keep our message small in connecting is to connect our friends with the congregation. A few weeks ago, I held a question box sermon where you were given index cards to ask me questions that I replied to on the fly from the pulpit. It is a terrifying exercise. Every August, I'm relieved I've got another about 11 months before I do it again. But one of the questions I get every year, and this year was no exception, was why aren't we more diverse as a congregation? We celebrate diversity. So why aren't we more diverse? And there are a lot of complex dynamics at play that I could explain my own theory of that, and I will point out we are not unique in this way. But I wonder, who have you invited to attend here? Who do you invite into your home? Who is sitting at your dinner table? And are those people then also invited to come celebrate with you on a Sunday morning? We could use a slightly bigger notepad. Another way we experience the negative side of our post-it note adhesion and our tiny messages is seen in our squeamishness to define expectations or clarify commitments. Everyone's so busy. We don't want to be a bother. And so sometimes we as leaders forget to even ask. Sometimes we don't know who to ask. Last week we made the plea to you about our teachers' crisis downstairs, and I thank those of you who stepped up so that our children's classes can continue this year. It's a big commitment to make, and we will celebrate our roster of teaching volunteers next week. And I thank the many more among you who seriously considered saying yes, but for whom at this time the most responsible and respectful answer was to say no. That process of discernment is also a good result. For those of you now looking for a shorter and safer risk, I've included in your order of service today a checklist for volunteers. I hope you'll give these challenges some thoughts. And if you fill it in this week or the next, just hand the filled sheet to an usher at the back as you leave. Be sure to include your name and contact information. Your reaching in is going to help our leaders reach out. And if you forget all about that paper, just email me. It's another way to make our message a little louder, a little clearer. I confess that over the past year, I've struggled with balancing the call to flexibility and adaptability of our congregation's culture with the call to deepening our commitments and observances. With no holy days of obligation, no required rituals, no expectations of rite of passage, does that mean we're doomed to create only connections of convenience? What are you willing to be inconvenienced for? Is the fear of saying yes that you will not be able to get unstuck? If Unitarian Universalists are the post-it notes of the religious world, then like the post-it note, we must work with the paradox of our weak adhesive in order to keep it as strength. A couple of times a year, I gather newcomers together who are interested in joining the congregation as voting members. We reflect on our individual journeys. I ask questions about childhood religion. We share our ideas about God, either past, present, or absent. I ask what brought you here to Grand River Unitarian, and I ask, why are you here? What are you looking for here? Take a quiet moment now and ask yourself that question. Why do you come here on a Sunday morning? What are you looking for? And now another experiment. I'd like you to take a moment to greet the people around you and ask at least 3 people those same questions and share your answers. Why do you come here on a Sunday morning? What are you looking for? I was pretty sure in taking the risk of saying, when you talk to each other, that would not be really hard to convince people to do it, although it's okay to also opt out. As an introvert, anytime someone says, turn to the people next to you, and I go, wash your That's also okay. It's always an invitation. So what were some of the answers? Just call them out.
Friends. Connections. Meditation.
Clarification. Reflection. Inspiration.
Community. Principles.
Children's education. Healing.
Be provoked.
Chance to practice your beliefs.
It's a thinking community. We don't follow the rules.
Like-minded people.
You know.
Meaning of life.
Ability to talk freely.
So, Ed, thank you, Stephen. So at newcomer sessions, the #1 answer is community. Did community come up in some of those circles? Raise your hand if you heard the word community at least once. Look around. The reason most people show up at church, and I suspect any church, that's not unique to us, is that they're looking for community, connections. And that extends to the second most popular answer I get in newcomer circles, related to the first. People are looking for a way to make a difference in the larger community. And churches, even one like ours with a seemingly non-sticky adhesive, even when there is no pressure to sign on as a member or sign off on a creed, churches in our community still do community really well. Congregational life in all denominations and faith persuasions have a usefully adhesive quality. It's a way we can connect across generations, connect with our innermost self and to transcendence, to connect beyond our limited experience. It connects us with history and to our home, the neighborhood, the earth, the interdependent web of existence. This is where we might gain strength and courage, find inspiration. In a church community, we can say our single efforts toward creating a more just and compassionate community multiplied through collective effort toward affordable housing, reducing poverty, sustainable living for a healthier planet, and by welcoming diversity. Connection is an antidote to the illusion of isolation. It can counter the despair of hopelessness and helplessness. Connection is one preventative of suicide. And to hear more about that, please return with your coffee at noon to hear our guest, Hannah Nash, discuss suicide prevention. Connection builds the commitment. Don't give up. Connection builds our capacity for compassion. Church life is, above and beyond any theology, a place for people to connect to depth, purpose, and meaning. In a congregation, we connect to the ancient practices of ritual and remembrance. We tell stories and share sustenance. We rehearse again and again that messy dance of difference and democracy. And I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. But I find I do have to remind people, I have to remind myself that connection takes practice and presence. You can only start to feel like you belong in a community if you consent to take part in it. Church consultant Michael Durrell quotes a Methodist minister who cheekily suggested that congregants, just go sit in your garages for an hour each Sunday morning. After a year, I'll ask you if you've turned into a car. So connection requires intentionality. As its inventor said, the humble Post-it note proved to be a whole new way of communicating. I've often used a Post-it note ritual in classes as a spiritual exercise. I pass around a pad, asking each person to take one and write on it the one thing that they need to be reminded of in order to be their best self. A Post-it note can be a kind of mini altar, just a reminder of a mantra or an aspiration, a goal or a centering image. And you can place that affirmation on a mirror in the car, by the phone, on a computer, in your calendar, anywhere you might see it regularly and be reminded. And equally important is that a Post-it note can both stick and be removed and replaced. You can always alter your altar as you grow, as you learn, as you are transformed. So make it your Post-it note prayer, a promise to yourself. On the size of a little Post-it note, we can make one promise together to commit, to stay connected. May it be so.